Overbearing mother-in-law almost ruined daughter's marriage, until a last-minute gesture changed everything. Hello, welcome, leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. The room was filled with a silence so thick it was almost suffocating. A man sat on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling as he held the divorce papers, knowing that with a single signature, his life would change forever. He could hear his daughter playing innocently in the next room, completely unaware that her family was on the brink of collapse. How did it all come to this? How could a love that once seemed unbreakable now be teetering on the edge of oblivion? But this wasn't just about two people drifting apart. There was something deeper, something darker that had been gnawing at the foundations of their marriage. A force that neither of them could fully comprehend, but that had been pulling them apart for years. And it all came down to one woman. Someone who, with every word and every action, seemed determined to tear them apart. But just as the final pieces of their life together were about to be shattered, something happened that no one could have predicted. What was this force that threatened to destroy everything? And what was the unexpected gesture that would turn their world upside down on the very eve of their separation? As the truth begins to unravel, so too does everything they thought they knew about each other, leading to a revelation that will leave you breathless. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast long shadows across the dimly lit bedroom, illuminating the hunched figure of Mark Thompson. His hands trembled as he clutched the divorce papers, the crisp legal documents a stark contrast to the crumpled tissues strewn around him. Outside, the bustling streets of suburban Boston continued their daily rhythm, oblivious to the turmoil within these four walls. Mark's gaze drifted to the framed photo on the nightstand, a snapshot of happier times. He and Sarah, radiant on their wedding day, their eyes filled with hope and promise. Now, 7 years later, that promise lay shattered like the vase Sarah had hurled at him during their last explosive argument. The sound of tiny footsteps in the hallway snapped Mark back to reality. 6-year-old Emily appeared in the doorway, her teddy bear clutched tightly to her chest. "Daddy?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Are you crying?" Mark hastily wiped his eyes, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach them. "No, sweetheart. Daddy's just thinking." Emily padded across the room, climbing onto the bed beside him. Her innocent brown eyes, so like Sarah's, searched his face. "Daddy?" she said, her lower lip quivering slightly. "Do you still love Mommy?" The question hit Mark like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain to his little girl that love wasn't always enough? That sometimes, even when two people loved each other, they could hurt each other so deeply that there was no coming back? As he struggled to find an answer, a memory flickered to life in his mind. It was just last week, as he'd been searching for old tax documents in the attic. He'd accidentally knocked over a dusty box of his mother-in-law's old correspondence, sending yellowed envelopes scattering across the floor. One particular envelope had caught his eye. The paper was of a finer quality than the others, and the handwriting on the front was elegant and unfamiliar. Curiosity piqued. Mark had opened it, unfolding the letter inside. The first lines hit him like a thunderbolt. "My dearest Thomas, I write this with a heavy heart, knowing that by the time you read these words, I will be married to another. Please understand that this decision was not made lightly. The sacrifice I am making is for the good of our family, though it breaks my heart to leave you." Mark had been so shocked that he'd nearly dropped the letter. This was unmistakably his mother-in-law's handwriting, but he'd never heard of any Thomas. What's more, the date on the letter was just a few months before Patricia had married Sarah's father. A secret love affair? A forced marriage? The implications were staggering. Before he could read further, he'd heard Sarah calling him from downstairs. Hastily, he'd stuffed the letter into his pocket, his mind reeling. Now, sitting on the bed with Emily's expectant gaze upon him, that letter felt like it was burning a hole in his desk drawer. Could this be the key to understanding Patricia's overbearing behavior? Her constant interference in their marriage, her criticism of every decision they made? For years, Mark had blamed his mother-in-law for the strain on his relationship with Sarah. Her constant presence, her disapproval, her manipulation, it had all taken its toll. But what if there was more to the story? What if Patricia's actions were driven by something deeper, more painful than he'd ever imagined? "Daddy," Emily's voice pulled him back to the present. "You didn't answer. Do you love Mommy?" Mark wrapped his arm around his daughter, pulling her close. "Of course I love Mommy," he said softly. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that are hard to fix, but that doesn't mean we stop loving each other." Emily nodded solemnly, as if processing this complex information. "Can't you just say sorry? That's what you tell me to do when I fight with my friends." A lump formed in Mark's throat. If only it were that simple. "I wish it were that easy, sweetheart. But don't you worry. No matter what happens between Mommy and me, we both love you more than anything in the whole world." As he held his daughter, Mark's mind raced. The divorce papers lay forgotten on the bed, suddenly seeming less final, less inevitable. That letter, could it hold the key to saving his marriage? To understanding the woman who had driven such a wedge between him and Sarah? He knew what he had to do. Tomorrow he would confront Patricia. He would demand answers, not just for his sake, but for Sarah's, for their families. As Emily drifted off to sleep in his arms, Mark made a silent vow. He wouldn't sign those papers. Not yet. Not until he uncovered the truth that had been hidden for so long. Because maybe, just maybe, in understanding Patricia's past, he could find a way to save his family's future. With a gentle kiss on Emily's forehead, Mark carefully tucked her into bed. Then, with renewed determination, he picked up his phone and typed out a message to Patricia. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. It's about a letter I found. From Thomas." His finger hovered over the send button for a moment before he pressed it, knowing that with this simple action, he was setting in motion events that could change everything. As the message sent notification appeared, Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation to come. Outside, a distant rumble of thunder echoed through the night, as if the very heavens were acknowledging the storm that was about to break over the Thompson family. Mark gazed out the window, watching as the first raindrops began to fall, each one carrying the weight of secrets long buried and truths yet to be revealed. The confrontation between Mark and his mother-in-law, Eleanor, crackled with tension in the dimly lit living room of her suburban home. The faded floral wallpaper and outdated furniture seemed to close in around them as Mark held out the yellowed letter, his hand trembling slightly. "What is this, Eleanor?" he demanded, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. "Who's Thomas? And why were you writing to him about giving up everything?" Eleanor's face drained of color as her eyes fixed on the letter. For a moment, she looked like she might faint, her hand clutching at the pearls around her neck. Where did you find that?" she whispered, her usual commanding tone replaced by something fragile and afraid. Mark's jaw clenched. "It doesn't matter. What matters is what it means. Have you been lying to Sarah her entire life?" Eleanor's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run from the truth that had finally caught up with her after all these years. She sank into her armchair, the fight seeming to drain out of her. "You don't understand," she said softly, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I did what I had to do to protect my daughter, to give her the life she deserved." Mark felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over him. The woman before him was so different from the overbearing, judgmental mother-in-law he'd come to resent. For the first time, he saw vulnerability in her eyes, and it shook him to his core. "What exactly did you do, Eleanor?" he pressed, his tone softening slightly. "Because whatever it was, it's tearing our family apart now." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with tears. I gave up the love of my life," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "to keep Sarah safe, to give her a stable home, a respectable name." The revelation hit Mark like a physical blow. He stumbled back, collapsing onto the nearby sofa as the implications began to sink in. His mind raced, trying to piece together this new information with everything he thought he knew about his wife's family. "Does Sarah know?" he asked, already dreading the answer. Eleanor shook her head vehemently. "No, and she can never find out. It would destroy her, Mark. You have to promise me you won't tell her." Mark felt the weight of an impossible choice settling on his shoulders. He loved Sarah more than anything in the world, but their marriage was already hanging by a thread. Could he keep this secret from her and still hope to save their relationship? As he grappled with his dilemma, Sarah's face swam before his eyes, her radiant smile, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed. He thought of their daughter, innocent and unaware of the turmoil threatening to tear her family apart. The thought of losing them both made his chest tighten with panic. I need time to think," he said finally, rising to his feet. "This changes everything, Eleanor. You have to understand that." Eleanor nodded, looking suddenly old and frail. "I know," she whispered, "but please, Mark, whatever you decide, remember that I only ever wanted what was best for my daughter." As Mark left Eleanor's house, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The warm summer evening felt oppressive, the weight of his newfound knowledge pressing down on him. He drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets of their quiet neighborhood. When he pulled into the driveway of the home he shared with Sarah, he sat in the car for a long moment, gathering his courage. Through the living room window, he could see Sarah moving about, probably getting their daughter ready for bed. The sight of her, oblivious to the turmoil raging inside him, made his heart ache. Inside, Sarah greeted him with a distracted smile, her arms full of laundry. "Hey, you're home late. Everything okay?" Mark forced a smile, hating the lie even as it left his lips. "Yeah, just got caught up with some work stuff. How was your day?" As Sarah launched into a story about their daughter's latest adventures at preschool, Mark felt the distance between them like a physical ache. He wanted nothing more than to take her in his arms, to confess everything and beg her forgiveness. But Eleanor's plea echoed in his mind, along with the fear of losing his family forever. That night, as he lay awake beside his sleeping wife, Mark's thoughts raced. He knew that keeping this secret could destroy their marriage just as surely as revealing it might. But the thought of causing Sarah pain, of shattering her world with this revelation about her mother, was unbearable. In the darkness, he made a decision. He would dig deeper, try to understand the full story before making any drastic moves. There had to be more to Eleanor's past, more pieces to this puzzle that might change everything. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Mark's resolve solidified. He would do whatever it took to uncover the truth and save his family, even if it meant confronting demons from the past that had long been buried. Little did he know that his decision would set in motion a chain of events that would test the very foundations of love, loyalty, and family, and change all their lives forever. The golden California sun filtered through the blinds of Mark's home office, casting long shadows across the scattered papers and old photographs spread out on his desk. For days now, he had been digging deeper into Eleanor's past, each new discovery adding another layer to the complex tapestry of secrets and sacrifices that had shaped his family's destiny. As he sifted through a stack of faded letters, a black and white photograph slipped out, landing face up on the carpet. Mark's breath caught in his throat as he picked it up. The image showed a much younger Eleanor, her arms wrapped around a tall, handsome man with kind eyes and a crooked smile. The happiness radiating from their faces was palpable, even across the decades. With trembling hands, Mark turned the photo over. On the back, in Eleanor's elegant script, were the words, "Thomas and me, Santa Monica Pier, 1985. The last perfect day." The pieces were starting to fall into place. Eleanor had abandoned her true love, Thomas, to marry Sarah's father, a man from a wealthy, respected family. But why? What could have driven her to make such a heart-wrenching choice? As Mark pondered this, his cell phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You're getting close to the truth, but be careful, some secrets are better left buried. Meet me at Griffith Observatory tomorrow at sunset if you want to know more." Mark's heart raced. Who could have sent this message? And how did they know about his investigation? He was tempted to ignore it, to protect himself and his family from whatever darkness lurked in Eleanor's past. But the need to understand, to find a way to save his marriage, pushed him forward. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Sarah was preparing dinner, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables a stark contrast to the turmoil in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was pulling away from her, hiding something. The distance between them seemed to grow with each passing day, and she felt powerless to bridge the gap. As she reached for a jar of pasta sauce, Sarah's hand brushed against an old recipe box tucked away on a high shelf. It tumbled to the floor, spilling its contents across the tile. Among the handwritten recipe cards was a small, tattered envelope addressed to her mother in unfamiliar handwriting. Curiosity overcame her, and Sarah carefully unfolded the letter inside. As she read the first few lines, her world tilted on its axis. "My dearest Eleanor, I know by now you've made your choice, and I respect your decision, no matter how much it pains me. I only hope that one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive yourself, as I've already forgiven you." Sarah's hands shook as she continued reading, tears blurring her vision. This letter, full of love and heartbreak, painted a picture of her mother she had never known, a young woman torn between love and duty, forced to make an impossible choice. As the weight of this revelation settled over her, Sarah heard Mark's footsteps approaching. Hastily, she shoved the letter into her pocket, wiping away her tears just as he entered the kitchen. "Hey," Mark said, his voice tentative. "Need any help with dinner?" Sarah turned to face him, struggling to keep her emotions in check. "No, I've got it," she replied, her voice sounding strained even to her own ears. "Actually, I'm not feeling very hungry. I think I'll just go lie down for a bit." Mark's brow furrowed with concern. "Are you okay? You look pale." For a moment, Sarah considered confronting him, demanding to know if he knew anything about this hidden part of her mother's past. But the fear of what else she might uncover held her back. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just a headache." As she brushed past him, Mark caught her arm gently. "Sarah, wait. There's something we need to talk about." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. But as she looked into Mark's eyes, she saw the same fear and uncertainty she felt reflected back at her. Whatever he was about to say, she realized she wasn't ready to hear it. "Not yet. Not now, Mark," she said softly, pulling away. "Please, I need some time alone." As Sarah retreated to their bedroom, closing the door behind her, Mark stood in the kitchen, feeling more lost than ever. The weight of the secrets he carried, combined with the knowledge that Sarah was now hiding something too, threatened to crush him. He glanced at his phone, the mysterious text message still glowing on the screen. Tomorrow at sunset, he would meet this unknown informant at Griffith Observatory. Whatever truths awaited him there, he knew they had the power to either save his family or tear it apart forever. As night fell over Los Angeles, two hearts lay awake in the same house, separated by walls of secrets and unspoken truths. Both Mark and Sarah clung to the hope that understanding the past might be the key to salvaging their future. But neither could have imagined the storm of revelations that was about to break over their lives, challenging everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of family. The soft glow of the evening sun filtered through the curtains of Patricia's living room, casting long shadows across the tense faces of Mark and his mother-in-law. The air was thick with unspoken words and barely contained emotions as Mark confronted Patricia with the evidence he'd gathered. "I know there's more to the story, Patricia," Mark said, his voice firm but tinged with compassion. "I found more letters, old photographs. I need to know the whole truth." Patricia's shoulders slumped, the weight of decades of secrets visibly pressing down on her. She looked older than Mark had ever seen her, vulnerability replacing her usual stern demeanor. "You're right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There is more, so much more." With trembling hands, Patricia reached for an old leather-bound photo album hidden beneath a stack of magazines. As she opened it, a faded photograph slipped out, a young woman with Patricia's eyes, cradling a newborn baby. "Her name was Grace," Patricia said, her voice breaking. "My firstborn." Mark's eyes widened in shock. "But, Sarah," Patricia shook her head, tears now flowing freely. "Sarah doesn't know. No one knows. Grace was born before I married Robert, Sarah's father. She was Thomas's child, the man I truly loved." The revelation hit Mark like a physical blow. He sank into the nearest chair, trying to process this new information that threatened to upend everything he thought he knew about his wife's family. "What happened?" he asked softly, dreading the answer. Patricia's gaze became distant, lost in painful memories. "I was young, scared. My family. They were furious when they found out I was pregnant. They gave me an ultimatum: either I give up the baby and marry the man they'd chosen for me, or they'd make sure Thomas never had a future." Mark listened in stunned silence as Patricia recounted the heart-wrenching tale of sacrifice and loss. How she'd been forced to give up her child. How the grief had nearly destroyed her. How she'd married Robert in a desperate attempt to provide stability for her unborn daughter, only to lose the baby shortly after birth. "I thought I was being punished," Patricia sobbed, her composure finally crumbling. "For giving up Grace, for betraying Thomas. When Sarah was born, I swore I'd do everything in my power to protect her from the pain I'd experienced." As the full weight of Patricia's confession settled over the room, Mark found himself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at the injustice Patricia had faced, sympathy for her unimaginable loss, and a growing understanding of the complex motivations behind her often overbearing behavior. "Patricia," he said gently, reaching out to take her hand. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through. But don't you see? By trying to control Sarah's life, you've been repeating the same mistakes your family made." Patricia looked up at him, her eyes wide with dawning realization. "Oh God," she whispered, "I've become what I hated most. I've been suffocating Sarah and you, just like my parents did to me." As the truth of her actions sank in, Patricia seemed to age years before Mark's eyes. The facade of the stern, controlling mother-in-law crumbled, revealing a woman broken by grief and haunted by the choices forced upon her. Mark found himself at a crossroads. He now possessed information that could potentially save his marriage, explaining years of Patricia's behavior. But revealing this truth could also shatter Sarah's world, destroying her relationship with her mother and upending everything she thought she knew about her family. As he wrestled with this impossible decision, his phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Where are you?" The lawyer called again. "We need to make a decision about the divorce papers." The weight of the moment pressed down on Mark. He looked at Patricia, seeing her in a new light, not as an adversary, but as a woman who had suffered immeasurable loss and was desperately trying to protect her daughter in the only way she knew how. "Patricia," he said, his voice filled with determination, "we need to tell Sarah the truth. All of it. She deserves to know, and it might be the only way to save our family." Patricia's eyes widened in fear. "But she'll hate me. I'll lose her forever." Mark shook his head. "You don't know that. Sarah has a big heart. If we explain everything, if she understands why you've acted the way you have all these years, there's a chance for healing. For all of us." As the last rays of sunlight faded from the room, Mark and Patricia sat in silence, the weight of their decision hanging heavy between them. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with potential pain and conflict. But for the first time in years, there was also a glimmer of hope, a chance to break the cycle of secrets and control that had nearly destroyed their family. Outside, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what the coming days would bring. The revelation had been made, the truth laid bare. Now it was up to Sarah to decide the fate of their family, and whether the wounds of the past could finally begin to heal. The Los Angeles sunset painted the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the tumultuous atmosphere inside the Thompson household. Sarah paced the living room, her mind racing with the implications of what she had discovered. The letter from Thomas to her mother, Eleanor, had opened a Pandora's box of questions and doubts. Meanwhile, Mark sat at the kitchen table, his fingers hovering over his phone. The mysterious text message about meeting at Griffith Observatory weighed heavily on his mind. He knew he should tell Sarah about it, but fear held him back. What if this was the final straw that broke their already fragile marriage? The tension between them had reached a breaking point. Sarah, unable to contain her emotions any longer, strode into the kitchen. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to talk. Now." Mark looked up, startled by the intensity in her eyes. "Okay," he said cautiously, setting his phone aside. "What's going on?" Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I found something about my mother. A letter from someone named Thomas. It seems like she gave up a great love to marry my father. Did you know anything about this?" The color drained from Mark's face. This was the moment he had been dreading. "Sarah, yes, I knew. I found out recently, and I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." Sarah's eyes flashed with hurt and anger. "You've been keeping this from me? For how long? What else aren't you telling me, Mark?" The dam broke, and words began pouring out of Mark. He told her about finding the letter in the attic, about confronting Eleanor, about the mysterious text message. As he spoke, Sarah's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and finally, a deep, penetrating sadness. "I can't believe this," she whispered, sinking into a chair. "My whole life, it feels like it's been built on lies. And you, Mark, how could you keep this from me?" Mark reached out to take her hand, but she pulled away. "I was trying to protect you," he said desperately. "I wanted to understand everything before I told you. I was afraid of hurting you." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Protect me? By lying to me? That's exactly what my mother did. And look where it got us." The silence that followed was deafening. Both of them realized they were standing at a crossroads, their marriage hanging by a thread. "What do we do now?" Mark asked softly. Sarah stood up, her face a mask of determination. "I need answers. From my mother, from this Thomas person if he's still alive. I can't live with these doubts anymore." "Let me help you," Mark pleaded. "We can do this together." Sarah shook her head. "No, Mark, I need to do this on my own. I don't even know who you are anymore." As she turned to leave the room, Mark felt panic rising in his chest. "Sarah, wait. What about us? What about our marriage?" She paused at the doorway, her hand resting on the frame. Without turning back, she said quietly, "I don't know, Mark. I just don't know anymore." The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house, leaving Mark alone with the weight of his choices. He glanced at his phone, the reminder for the Griffith Observatory meeting flashing on the screen. With a heavy heart, he realized he had to go. It might be his last chance to uncover the full truth and save his family. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, two paths diverged. Sarah, driving through the streets of LA with tears blurring her vision, headed towards her childhood home for a long-overdue confrontation with her mother. And Mark, his heart heavy with regret and hope, made his way up the winding road to Griffith Observatory, praying that whatever he learned there would be enough to bring Sarah back to him. The night air was thick with tension and unspoken truths as both Mark and Sarah embarked on their separate quests for answers. Little did they know that the revelations awaiting them would shake the very foundations of their lives, forcing them to question everything they thought they knew about love, family, and the power of forgiveness. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, the city of Los Angeles held its breath, waiting to see if the Thompson family could weather the storm of secrets that threatened to tear them apart forever. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as Mark stood in the driveway of the home he once shared with Sarah. His hand hovered over the doorbell, heart pounding with the weight of the decision he was about to make. Tomorrow was supposed to be the day they signed their divorce papers, but the revelations of the past few weeks had changed everything. Inside, Sarah paced the living room, a whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The partial truths Mark had let slip, combined with her own discoveries about her mother's past, had left her reeling. She jumped at the sound of the doorbell, taking a deep breath before opening the door. "Mark," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and apprehension. I didn't expect you tonight." "Sarah, we need to talk," Mark replied, his tone urgent. "There's something you need to know before we make any decisions about our future." As they settled on the couch, the tension between them was palpable. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but before he could utter a word, they were interrupted by another ring of the doorbell. Sarah frowned, confusion etched on her face as she went to answer. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw her mother, Patricia, standing on the porch, looking more vulnerable than Sarah had ever seen her. "Mom!" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Patricia's eyes were red-rimmed, her usual composure completely shattered. "I'm sorry, Sarah," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything. I need to tell you the truth. All of it." Mark appeared behind Sarah, surprise evident on his face. "Mrs. Thompson, I don't think." But Patricia cut him off, her words tumbling out in a rush. "No, Mark. It's time. I can't let my mistakes ruin my daughter's happiness any longer." As the three of them gathered in the living room, Patricia began to unravel the tangled web of secrets she'd been keeping for decades. She told Sarah about Thomas, her true love, and the impossible choice she'd been forced to make. She spoke of Grace, the daughter she'd had to give up, and the overwhelming grief that had shaped her actions for years. "I thought I was protecting you, Sarah," Patricia sobbed, reaching for her daughter's hand. "I was so afraid you'd make the same mistakes I did, that you'd end up hurt like I was. But instead, I've been suffocating you, trying to control your life the way my parents controlled mine." Sarah sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face as she tried to process the revelations. The mother she thought she knew was transforming before her eyes, years of resentment and misunderstanding giving way to a new, painful understanding. "Why?" Sarah finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Patricia's shoulders slumped. "I was ashamed, Sarah. Ashamed of my weakness, of giving up my child, of not fighting harder for the life I wanted. And then, as the years went by, the lie became easier than facing the truth." Mark watched the exchange, his heart aching for both women. He saw the pain in Sarah's eyes, but also a glimmer of something else, understanding. Perhaps even the beginnings of forgiveness. "Sarah," he said softly, drawing her attention, "your mother's story, it helped me understand so much about our relationship, about the pressure we've been under. I think we've been fighting the wrong battles all along." Sarah turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "What are you saying, Mark?" He took a deep breath. "I'm saying that maybe we've been too quick to give up. That maybe, with all the truth finally out in the open, we have a chance to start over. To build something stronger, without the shadows of the past hanging over us." Patricia looked between them, hope and fear warring in her expression. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," she said. "But please, don't let my mistakes cost you your happiness. You two love each other. I see that now, clearer than ever." The room fell silent, the weight of years of misunderstandings and hidden truths hanging in the air. Sarah stood up, walking to the window to gaze out at the darkening sky. When she turned back, her face was a mixture of pain, love, and determination. "Mom," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I can't pretend this doesn't change everything. I'm hurt and angry, and it's going to take time for me to process all of this. But," she paused, taking a deep breath, "but I understand why you did what you did, and I want to try to forgive you." She then turned to Mark, her expression softening. "And you didn't give up on us even when I was ready to. You fought to understand, to uncover the truth." Mark stood, moving closer to her. "Because I love you, Sarah. I always have and I always will." Patricia watched as her daughter and son-in-law embraced, tears of relief and hope streaming down her face. She knew there was a long road ahead, that trust would need to be rebuilt and wounds would need time to heal. But for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her secrets lifting. replaced by the possibility of a future filled with honesty and love. As the night deepened outside, the three of them sat together, talking, crying, and beginning the process of healing. The divorce papers lay forgotten on a side table, no longer a looming threat, but a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. In that moment of unexpected grace and forgiveness, a new chapter was beginning for the Thompson family, one built on truth, understanding, and the unbreakable bonds of love. The morning of the scheduled divorce hearing dawned with an eerie calm over Los Angeles. Soft golden light filtered through the curtains of the Thompson household, illuminating two figures sitting silently at the kitchen table. Mark and Sarah, once inseparable, now felt worlds apart despite their physical proximity. Sarah's eyes were rimmed with red, evidence of a sleepless night spent grappling with the revelations about her mother's past. Mark's shoulders sagged under the weight of guilt and regret, his mind racing with all the things left unsaid. As they prepared to leave for the courthouse, the air thick with unspoken words, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a text from Eleanor. "Please, before you do anything, come see me. There's something you need to know." Sarah's hand trembled as she showed the message to Mark. Their eyes met, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Without a word, they changed course, heading to Eleanor's house instead of the courthouse. The drive was tense, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the car engine. As they pulled up to Eleanor's modest suburban home, Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Eleanor opened the door before they could knock, her face a mask of anguish and remorse. "Sarah, Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming. Please, come in." The living room was bathed in the warm glow of morning light, family photos lining the walls, a stark reminder of the bonds at stake. Eleanor gestured for them to sit, then slowly lowered herself into an armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I owe you both an explanation," she began, her voice trembling, "and an apology." Over the next hour, Eleanor laid bare the entire truth of her past. She spoke of her love for Thomas, the pregnancy that had changed everything, and the heart-wrenching decision to give up her child to protect the man she loved. Tears flowed freely as she recounted the years of guilt and regret that had shaped her into the controlling, overprotective mother she had become. "I thought I was protecting you, Sarah," Eleanor said, reaching out to take her daughter's hand. "But I see now that I was just repeating the mistakes of my own parents. I was so afraid of you experiencing the pain I'd gone through that I nearly destroyed your chance at happiness." Sarah sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face as she absorbed the weight of her mother's confession. Mark watched, his heart aching for both women, seeing for the first time the deep well of pain that had driven Eleanor's actions. "Mom," Sarah finally said, her voice choked with emotion. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Eleanor's shoulders slumped. "I was ashamed, Sarah, ashamed of my weakness, of the choices I made. I thought if I could control everything in your life, I could protect you from making the same mistakes. But I see now that all I did was push you away." As the full impact of Eleanor's words settled over the room, a shift seemed to occur. The anger and resentment that had built up over years began to crumble, replaced by a fragile understanding. Mark, who had remained silent throughout Eleanor's confession, finally spoke. "Eleanor," he said gently, "I think I understand now. You were trying to give Sarah the life you thought you'd lost. But in doing so, you nearly cost her the chance at true happiness, the kind you had with Thomas." Eleanor nodded, tears flowing freely. "You're right, Mark, and I'm so sorry. To both of you. Can you ever forgive me?" The room fell silent as Sarah and Mark exchanged a long look. Years of misunderstandings, arguments, and pain hung in the balance. But in that moment, something shifted. Sarah saw her mother not as the overbearing figure who had tried to control her life, but as a woman who had suffered immense loss and was desperately trying to protect her child in the only way she knew how. With a deep breath, Sarah stood and walked over to her mother. She knelt beside Eleanor's chair and, in a gesture that spoke louder than words, wrapped her arms around her. "I forgive you, Mom," she whispered, And I love you. The dam broke. Eleanor clung to her daughter, years of pent-up emotion pouring out in heaving sobs. Mark watched, his own eyes misting over, as mother and daughter began the long process of healing. As the embrace ended, Sarah turned to Mark, her eyes shining with a mix of tears and newfound clarity. "Mark," she said softly, "I think I understand now why you kept this from me at first. You were trying to protect me too, weren't you?" Mark nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I was. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning." Sarah crossed the room to him, taking his hands in hers. "We both made mistakes," she said. "But if Mom can find the courage to face her past, maybe we can find the strength to face our future. Together." The weight of the divorce papers, the lawyer's calls, the impending court date, all of it seemed to evaporate in that moment. As the morning sun streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a warm, hopeful glow, the Thompson family stood on the precipice of a new beginning. Eleanor watched as Sarah and Mark embraced, their love for each other shining through despite the pain and misunderstandings of the past weeks. For the first time in years, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. By facing her own past, she had given her daughter the chance at a future filled with love and truth. As they left Eleanor's house that day, the divorce papers signed and forgotten, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. But with the truth finally laid bare and forgiveness offered, there was hope. Hope for a future where love could triumph over fear, where honesty could break the cycles of the past, and where a family once on the brink of destruction could find its way back to each other. The Los Angeles sun shone brightly as they drove away, its warmth the promise of new beginnings and the power of redemption. The Thompson family had weathered the storm of secrets and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The gentle warmth of the early morning sun filtered through the curtains of the Thompson family home, casting a soft glow over the living room. Sarah stood by the window, cradling a steaming mug of coffee, her gaze fixed on the peaceful suburban street outside. The events of the past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, revelations, and difficult conversations. But as she stood there, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in years. Behind her, Mark emerged from the hallway, his hair tousled from sleep. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight of his wife bathed in the golden light. The love he felt for her in that moment was overwhelming, tinged with a newfound appreciation for the strength and resilience she had shown. "Good morning," he said softly, approaching her. Sarah turned, a small smile playing on her lips. "Morning," she replied, leaning into him as he wrapped an arm around her waist. They stood in comfortable silence, both reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The divorce papers that had once loomed over them like a dark cloud were now nothing more than a distant memory, shredded and discarded. "I talked to Mom last night," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "She's doing better." The therapy sessions seemed to be helping her come to terms with everything. Mark nodded, feeling a mix of relief and admiration for his mother-in-law. Patricia's decision to seek professional help to deal with her past traumas had been a crucial step in the healing process for the entire family. "That's good to hear," he replied. "How are you feeling about everything?" Sarah took a deep breath, considering the question. "Honestly, it's still overwhelming at times. Learning about Grace, about Thomas, it's changed how I see my entire childhood. But," she paused, turning to face Mark fully, "but I'm grateful in a way. Understanding Mom's past, why she acted the way she did, it's helped me forgive her. And it's made me appreciate what we have even more." Mark pulled her closer, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I'm so proud of you, Sarah. The way you've handled all of this. You're incredible." A comfortable silence fell between them again, broken only by the distant sound of their daughter Emily stirring in her room. The patter of small feet announced her arrival moments before she burst into the living room, her face bright with the untroubled joy of childhood. "Mommy! Daddy!" Emily exclaimed, running to hug their legs. Sarah and Mark exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with love and a renewed commitment to providing their daughter with the stable, loving home they had fought so hard to preserve. As they went about their morning routine, making breakfast, packing Emily's lunch for school, there was a lightness in the air that had been missing for too long. The secrets and misunderstandings that had nearly torn them apart were now in the open, replaced by a new level of honesty and understanding. Later that afternoon, as Sarah prepared dinner, she found herself humming softly, a simple act that spoke volumes about the peace she had found. Mark, setting the table, caught her eye and smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for this second chance they had been given. The doorbell rang, and Emily raced to answer it, her excited voice carrying through the house. "Grandma's here." Patricia entered, looking more relaxed and at ease than she had in years. The stiff, controlling demeanor that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a warmth that radiated from within. She hugged Emily tightly before moving to embrace Sarah and Mark. "I brought dessert," she said, holding up a bag. Emily's favorite chocolate chip cookies. As they gathered around the dinner table, the conversation flowed easily. There were moments of laughter, shared memories, and even a few happy tears. Patricia, once the source of so much tension, was now an integral part of the family's healing process. After dinner, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the backyard, the family sat on the porch swing. Emily nestled between Sarah and Mark, with Patricia nearby in a comfortable chair. The air was filled with the gentle chirping of crickets and the distant laughter of neighborhood children. Sarah looked around at her family, her daughter, innocent and full of promise, her husband, whose love and determination had helped save their marriage, and her mother, finally free from the burden of her past. She felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. "You know," she said softly, "I think we're going to be okay." Mark squeezed her hand, nodding in agreement. Patricia smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, the Thompson family sat together, bound by love, forgiveness, and the promise of a brighter future. They had weathered a storm that had threatened to tear them apart, and emerged stronger, more united than ever before. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of family and the peace of a new beginning, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with honesty, compassion, and an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the power of forgiveness. Thank you very much for listening to this story. Comment below what you thought of the ending and from which city you're listening to us. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, click on the next story that's appearing on your screen now. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories together. See you soon.